Okay, welcome back everyone at Commons and online as well to the last feature session in GEEF 2023. We have two moderators for this session, Professor Yunho Lee, Dean of the College of Social Science, Yonsei University. Please welcome him. And Philip Lee, the President of Korea, Europe, and EU. And I just heard that Philip Lee, the President Lee, will be the main moderator among those two. So we'll be hearing about the industrial carbonization perspectives from Europe and Korea. Professor Lee and President Lee, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much for making this introduction. I'm very pleased and honored to be moderating this session along with Professor Yunho. And the title of this session is Perspectives from Korea and Europe for Decarbonization. It's kind of main issue these days and a challenge for corporates as industry produces about a quarter of global GDP and employment, but that also at the same time produces about a quarter of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a great opportunity today to hear about assessment from experts and suggestions maybe for the future, given the challenges which are awaiting us. And as it is in the hands of industry, we will also hear about comments from think tanks, institutions, financial institutions, not only industry experts. The panel is very much diversified with mostly Korean and European French speakers who are connected now from Paris. So we expect a very lively and mutually agreeable and fruitful discussion. Before starting this session, I would like to briefly introduce GEE, which is Korea, Europe, and EU, which is a new think tank established recently, very recently. So the main activities we are covering are in three areas. One is a think tank, covering analysis in geopolitics, regulation, soft power, sustainable development, human resources, innovation and technology. We also have collaboration platforms, working groups trying to identify new avenues, new business models and opportunities, and comprehensive assistance program tailored to more individual needs in terms of needs from institutions and companies. And also, last but not least, the Next Gen program, which is to engage young generation in all of our projects and work streams, and in order to create synergies and launch new initiatives together. So we have a team of working groups, and I would like to emphasize a little bit this working group, ESG sustainability, and for all the groups we have co-leads. And I'm very happy to introduce the co-leader of this working group, who is Jay Lee, sitting on my left, who is the team leader and ESG consulting team at KB Bank, and he will be one of the speakers today. The other colleague is Stéphane Ferrara, who is Chief Business Officer of Carbios, a new French startup which is recycling chemicals and textiles, and who used to be the CEO of Arkema Korea. So this is Next Gen program, and we had an inaugural forum in Paris recently on January 19, which was quite successful with personalities and experts from public institutions, corporates, coming and delivering speeches. And there was also a reception at the French Élysée Palace with the French president, where I had an opportunity to present the key project to President Macron and to the former Prime Minister, Mr. Raffarin, who was also the keynote speaker of our forum. So this is it for the introduction. I would like now to give the floor to our two main speakers, who are Mr. Joseph Delatte, who is a research fellow, senior research fellow at Institut Montaigne, and also to Mr. Yonsei Kim, who is Secretary General of International Transport Forum at OECD, which is a think tank dealing with transportation policies and transport issues. So let me first introduce Mr. Joseph Delatte, who will be speaking and introducing his recent actions, studies at Institut Montaigne, and also some initiatives that he would like to suggest to us today. So Joseph, the floor is yours.
I'm very delighted to be addressing you today in this very timely and an interesting forum. Welcome from Paris. As Philippe already said, I am a research fellow for climate policy at Institut Montaigne. I will be sharing my slides. I think I will be able to do it. Wait, right? Yes. Can you read it? Oh, okay. Wait. Okay, wonderful. Yes, it's working. So the main topic I will be addressing today is industry decarbonization and the way to trigger cooperation between Europe and Korea, or in general between Europe and Northeast Asia. This is actually part of a very big research project we have done last year at Institut Montaigne, connected to an initiative taken by the German presidency of the G7 that launched a climate club at the end of 2022. And with this presentation, by the discussion, I hope we can discuss how to actually go further than the current German initiative in order to decarbonize industry worldwide. Because as you might know, industry produce goods, and industrial goods are traded worldwide. So if you do not have international regulation, international cooperation in order to create line of decarbonization, decarbonization just won't be possible at the global level. But to tackle climate change and to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, which is 27 years from now, we will need to accelerate the path in order to reduce our GHG emissions. Very briefly, what is a climate club? A climate club is a group of countries that would implement mutually agreed measures with compliance mechanism. And of course, this initiative that was proposed and launched by the G7 must be larger than the G7, and including industrial leaders like Korea is essential. So how to include these countries like China, Japan, or South Korea, and what kind of climate club can be achieved with these countries, very essential. These are the two biggest questions we are facing so far. So many measures could be implemented through a climate club. For instance, carbon pricing. Countries like Korea or the European Union have already carbon pricing implemented through an emission trading schemes. That could be a line of cooperation between the two regions. You know that carbon pricing are also being implemented all around the world in many countries, and that is definitely a tool for understanding each other's policy and to harmonize these policy throughout. And of course, very recently, the European Union has implemented the very important measure called carbon border adjustment mechanism, which means that the EU will now account for emissions embedded in trade when they import goods from around the world. It concerns Korea and concerns many other regions, and these also could be questions discussed for industrial decarbonization through a climate club. And finally, I will speak a bit more about how to trigger industry cooperation and industrial policies cooperation. The goal here is to establish the supply chain of the future. So, for instance, for green hydrogen, for green steel, and for many other goods that we have to decarbonize in the next 27 years. So far, recently, and I'm sure our discussant will give us an outline of all this. But there are many divergences in industrial policies and industrial decarbonization policies between the different countries. Let's say between Korea and Europe, the way decarbonization is seen in the steel industry is very different. So that should be a point of cooperation between Korea and Europe. So what we did at Institut Montaigne is to support the creation of a climate forum, which could foster the discussion on specific rules for each sectors, specific industrial sectors. And we made some proposals, for instance, to adopt sectoral green certificate, which would certify the carbon content of goods in order to really be sure that the goods that are traded between different regions are indeed carbon neutral or with a certain amount of emissions, in order to be sure that we are really able to green trade and that we are really able to switch from a carbon intensive trade, as we are doing right now, to a carbon neutral trade by 2050. But in order to do that, you need to iron out the methodological incomparability between the different regulation implemented in Korea, for instance, and Europe. And that could be something that could be done through a climate forum, through a climate club, or through bilateral relation, as we do today in this session. All of this, of course, is to promote cooperation for the creation of green markets, for instance, green steel, green hydrogen, etc. I'm sure the discussant will address these questions. So we have very briefly established 4 pillars of a feasible climate forum in order to decarbonize the industrial sectors. We believe through the research we have done that policy differentiation must be possible. So different countries will implement different policies. That's completely unavoidable. But what you need to do is some sort of conversion guidelines in order to ensure that the goods that are traded are still carbon neutral, or that the carbon contents of the goods. So I will not go further into this discussion here, but basically that is the point we have created, the report we have done. In maybe one last remark with this very beautiful figure that my colleagues have created. What we have to do before 2050 is to develop lead markets for carbon neutral goods, because in many sectorial industrial sectors, these goods are never going to be cheaper than their carbon intensive option. So what you need to do is to give an advantage to the carbon neutral goods and the carbon neutral product, and there are ways to do that. And with this figure, we try to explain the different steps that are necessary. For instance, to cooperate to create these carbon neutral products, like the development of sectoral green value chains, the green technology availability roadmap between the countries that would cooperate to create these big markets, to include members from each part of the value chain, because not every country produces the same goods in the same part of the value chain. So this is also a very important cooperation point. And of course, cutting red tapes domestically and between partners for these goods that are carbon neutral, and establish predictability through procurement and regulation in the forum. So I will stop here for my presentation, but I hope it will launch the discussion on how to decarbonize industrial sectors and how to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. And I'm very happy for this discussion, and I will give you back the floor, Philippe.
Thank you very much, Joseph. Now I would like to turn to Mr. Yongtae Kim, Secretary General of International Transport Forum at OECD, who has been in post in Paris for 8 years. Before getting to Paris, he was high official at the Ministry of Transportation in Korea, and we're very pleased to have him as one of our speakers today. Mr. Kim, are you connected? Can you start?
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I will go from slide. Do you see my screen?
No, we cannot see your materials yet. We can hear you, but we cannot see anything.
Okay. What about now?
Yes, yeah. All right, we got it.
Okay. So sorry for some technical issues. And I'm happy to be here with you today, and I will tackle this question from an international organization perspective. In ITF, basically, many of you might not know about ITF, International Transport Forum, and we have 64 member countries from all over the world, but 44 countries are from Europe. So created in 2006, basically, we are still Euro-focused and Europe-dominated. I think that's perhaps in line with today's topic, dealing with cooperation between Europe and Korea. And we, as a think tank, produce more than 60 reports every year, and we organize the biggest gathering of the ministers every year in Leipzig. And so this year, again, in May, we'll hold a ministers meeting who will decide the future orientation of the mobility sector. And currently, we have 5 main themes in the mobility sector, and they are decarbonization and connectivity and universal access and inclusion and safety, health and security, and digitalization. And definitely decarbonization is the biggest topic of all the subjects that we are dealing with today, because it's not a question of one country or 2 countries, and it's a global issue. And also we have some special board called Corporate Partnership Board, interacting with policymakers. They are composed of mostly private sector companies and semi-public companies. And as you see, there are very famous companies like Amazon and also energy companies, and now getting more and more interested in dealing with the mobility sector questions. And challenge is very clear, because as we feel these days, and there are more demand for traveling and supply chain issues. And according to our analysis in ITF, we basically publish transport outlook every 2 years, and the latest version was 2021 version, and now we are preparing for the next version, which will be launched in this May at the ministers meeting in Leipzig. And definitely by 2050 we'll see a visible the growth in transport demand on the passenger side and also freight side. And naturally we'll have a lot more CO2 emissions coming from that evolution. So according to our internal modeling analysis, we estimated that emissions would grow by 16% to 2050 globally. There can be some differences depending on the country, for example, in the Western world and also developing and underdeveloped world. And in general, we have 3 different the scenarios. So if we maintain a status quo in our policy initiative and policy strategies, and what destination we reach. And the next scenario is if we become a little bit more ambitious, we can make a change. And finally, if we become very ambitious, and how much positive impact we can expect. So it is shown in our outlook. And as I mentioned, 2023 version will be launched this year again. So this has become a very interesting reference for all the countries in the world. And we analyzed the reality related to the COP meetings and the ambition in the decarbonizing transport, especially. And basically 98% of the NDCs mention transport, because since 2015, where Paris Agreement was signed, and all the countries on the planet, they made ambitious approach in their policies, national policies. But as I mentioned, most of the countries, they mention transport, and 83% of the NDCs include transport measures, but only 18% of NDCs set CO2 reduction targets in the mobility sectors. So sometimes it can be good to maintain a holistic view, but knowing that 25% of the CO2 comes from transport sector, basically we have to deal with transport sector a bit separately. So this is kind of the analysis of the reality. And when we talk about sustainability, I would like to stress that the notion is evolving significantly, especially according to the definition provided by the World Bank. And sustainability not only means environmental aspect, but also universal access and safety and efficiency and green. So basically today when we talk about sustainability, it means everything. So that means that the questions and answers are becoming more and more complicated. And ITF is now focusing on the Decarbonizing Transport Initiative, which was launched in 2016 after the Paris Agreement signed in 2015. So now we try to provide some assistance and support for policymakers, especially in our member countries, but also to non-member countries as well. We are collecting best practices. And we know that in every COP meeting, a lot of people still repeat the slogan from ambition to action. And also at the last COP where I was in Glasgow for COP26, I didn't go to Egypt, but still people continue to repeat the slogan, the famous slogan from ambition to action. So what that means is that we need more implementation and concrete steps to achieve our goals. There are too many goals already set by United Nations, Sustainable Development Goals, and also European Commission, and also World Bank and so on. But now it's time to focus more on methodological issues and also implementation tools. And ITF finally launched it in 2020 in July, one interesting reference, which is called ITF Transport Climate Action Directorate, so-called TCAT, which provides more than 80 government measures. And each measure provides rough estimation of the CO2 reductions if government can use. And depending on the context, each country can try to combine different measures, and they can at least try to convince people that they are doing well or doing bad. So it has become a very important and interesting reference. Also, it was endorsed by the UNFCCC organizing COP every year. So it's a living document, and it's being updated by the collection of the different best practices and so on. And also, ITF recently finalized the DT implement. As I mentioned, implementation is more important perhaps at this stage. And also we focus on non-ITF members like a SIPA, so Central and Southeast Asia. And also we have a DTE funded by German government. So many countries now are cooperating to solve these problems on the planet, knowing that we have to make some concrete steps and concrete outcomes. We don't have time to lose and waste, so we have to go faster to bring more efficiency to our collective efforts. And this is my final slide, and it shows that from ITF, as you know, COP meetings, it's not transport ministers participating in the negotiation. It's the ministers of environment and minister of foreign affairs. So basically, since 2006, we try to voice our opinions more strongly at the COP meeting. And even though we cannot have access to negotiation table, and transport ministers gathered for the first time officially in Glasgow 2026, and they adopted their strategies for the future. And we would love to continue. And it was a bit less visible at the last COP27 in Egypt, but already we are preparing for the next COP that will take place in Abu Dhabi, in UAE. So COP28 will be a great turning point for all the transport community, and this will definitely be a great contribution to decarbonize our society in general, not only to decarbonize our transport sector. So I think in the interest of time, maybe I cannot go into more details, and thank you for your attention. Perhaps we can discuss more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kim. So now we will start our panel discussion with 3 speakers from various sectors, maritime shipbuilding, finance, and hydrogen. So that will allow us to have a broad perspective of and practical perspective of where decarbonization is standing in each sector. I will ask our speakers to be concise in the interest of time, and to introduce shortly themselves when they start their introduction. So in order to start, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Philippe Berthet-Rotière, who is the CEO and chairman of GTT.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Philippe. Yes, GTT is the technology company providing technology for LNG carriers, and also very much involved in producing electrolyzers. What we can say is we can see that in different parts of the world, decarbonization is progressing at a different pace. And it's a matter of concern, first of all, because carbon is a global issue, but also if decarbonization is progressing at different pace, it means that international trade, international cooperation is in danger. More countries or group of countries are going to progress into decarbonization, the less they're going to agree to work with countries progressing much more slowly on this matter. Well, in the maritime industry, by definition, maritime industry is global. And if you begin to have regional regulation, you kill very quickly the international trade through shipping. So negotiations are fairly difficult, but I would say that targets for decarbonization for the shipping industry have been set, and they are very ambitious. Basically, it means that ships currently existing have to reduce their emissions. It's very difficult on ships existing. It's easier on ships which have to be built, but you cannot renew all of a sudden the worldwide commercial fleet. So ship owners have to do something to reduce the emissions of their existing fleets. That is going to have a major impact, slowing down the cruise speed of ships. It means that we are going to need more ships, but also pushing very soon people to look at new ships. And there you can see that well, there will be countries which are going to be able to do so. Ship owners who are going to be able to do so, and some others who are not going to have the resources of being able to do that. And it may mean that the winners will be the strongest players for the time being. And we are a bit concerned that may create a lot of tensions in the worldwide maritime industry. We are pleased to work with, in fact, our current partners.
By the way, can I interrupt just 1 second? Can you explain briefly what GTT is doing in maritime industry? Because I'm not sure everyone knows exactly what you're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, we provide the technology for LNG carriers. Most of the LNG carriers, so the tanks, basically, the cryogenic tanks. Our largest partners are Korean shipyards. 90% of the LNG carriers are coming from Korea. And so we work hand in hand for nearly 40 years with our current partners. And we face this situation where we have to provide solutions for meeting the very ambitious IMO targets. So we have to do that in improving the design of the shapes, in installing carbon capture systems on shapes, in providing digital solutions for optimizing the routing of ships. Well, plenty of solutions in order to address this carbon issue on ships, even though shipping, it's producing 3% of the worldwide CO2 emissions, while it transports 80% of the goods on our planet. So it's, in terms of CO2, it's already efficient, but it's not because it's efficient that we have not to address these 3%. So through these very ambitious targets, which have been set by the International Maritime Organization, we have to keep on reducing CO2 and trying to maintain a balance between the various players, various countries, making sure that existing ship owners in parts of the world which are less rich, less powerful than some others, are going to remain lively and active, even though we further progress in this decarbonization roadmap.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Berthet-Rotière. Now I'd like to turn to my neighbor, Mr. J.W. Lee, who is a team leader at KB Bank. Can you introduce yourself and explain what you're doing at KB?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm Jay Lee. I'm working for ESG Consulting in KB Bank in South Korea, one of the biggest banks in South Korea. We have the 700 billion asset, US dollar, in our balance sheet, and among them we have about approximately 20% of high-intense carbonized corporation loan asset or investment. So in the financial sector, we have impacted on the many kind of diverse industry and corporation in these days, and among 20% of 700 billion asset would be maybe impacted harshly in 5 to 10 years because of many kind of ESG matters, and as Young-tae Kim commented about, the many different kind of ESG initiative makes very, very difficult to respond the ESG matters on, especially for small and middle-sized corporation. Basically, we are helping to them to shift decarbonized business model for helping as working as an advisor for their shift to the decarbonized business model. Also, in these days, in the given circumstance, interest rate high and inflation also should be penalized by current government bank interest rate policy. So we are highly focused on ESG implementation and ESG advisory service to our corporation client to shift their decarbonized business model. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Michael Naori, who is Corporate Affairs Asia Pacific Director and Hydrogen Marketing Manager at L'Air Liquide.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me today to talk to this wonderful event. So first, I will describe a bit what my company is doing. So Air Liquide is what we call an industrial gas company. And so we are selling gases, all type of gases except natural gas to a very large variety of companies and industries, from healthcare to heavy industries to electronics. So we are very much covering all the industrial sectors. We are present in 78 countries, so this is also very interesting because we have this global perspective without being necessarily part of global trade. And Air Liquide is very much active in the energy transition and in the decarbonization effort on three main pillars. The first one is to decarbonize our own assets. We are very much an energy-intensive company, so there is a lot to do for us to reduce our footprint. Second pillar, it's to support our customers. So since we have customers in all the industries, we are working with all of them to support their decarbonization. So on this, we are touching to topics such as carbon capture. We are touching topics on hydrogen for industries, but also new ways to develop their own industries. For example, hydrogen for steel. We are working with a better usage of our gas for better combustion, for example, what we call oxy-combustion. So all those topics with our customers. And then the last pillar, and this is what I will more focus today, is the development of new energies, such as biomethane or hydrogen. And so we have been very critical at the development of hydrogen, being leading not only thanks to a very long experience, about 60 years working on hydrogen topic, but also we have pushed the global understanding of the hydrogen towards policymakers and towards the public with the development of the Hydrogen Council and other activities at the country level. So we have been part of each key consortium of developing hydrogen in France, but also in Korea. For example, we are part of INET or Co-Hydrogen, or this two consortium to develop stations in the country. So a few remarks, and then I will go back to the discussion. But first remark I wanted to make is we talk a lot about changes and what the country should do. From an industry perspective or from company perspective, the difficulty is to manage all the change in regulations. Those changes are appearing very fast, while the pace of industry is very much different. We invest for the next 40, 50 years when we take a decision of investment, and it's very much difficult to adjust to new policies. So I will say the first key thing that should be done per country or at global level is to give a very strong perspective on what is supposed to be the end game, because this can bring confidence in industry to invest and to make sure that their investment is actually still relevant in the coming decades. But in the same time, industries are not completely stupid, and they know some way what is the end game. And so when we take decision now, at least for my company, but I guess for all our customers, the topic of energy transition and decarbonization is very much at the top of the priority. The second thing I think Joseph mentioned is a huge difficulty to align companies, to align countries between them, and it's true with so much difference between the background of or the energy mix of each country. It's quite difficult to align in terms of policies, but there is a lot of things that we can align. We can align on standards, we can align on certification methodologies, we can align on some cooperation in third countries. So all of these that are not critical to the defense of countries could be assessed, because today we see a very strong return of the point of energy security, and it's true that this will be difficult to manage since 2022. It will be difficult to manage the open globalization on those topics when the energy security is at the core of everyone's mind. Then we have the fact that companies like mine are acting at global level. And so I will not be too worried to left out countries, because basically, even if a country is not so much acting, company will need to decarbonize all their activities across the world. So this will embark and will push, at the end of the day, I mean, for when the multinational companies that are working on those topics, will push all the countries into decarbonization. And just to conclude a bit, so this panel is about opportunity rising from crisis. And so I agree completely with Philippe on that. We will see with this transition a lot of new champions. We will see some winners and some losers in this transition. But what I see from an industry perspective is that there is also a big change in business model. And this big change is, I can give a really short example. It's the idea that, for me, we went from a world where it was very difficult to set up joint ventures, to set up this type of collaboration, because everyone knows that having several partners is always difficult, to a point where now it's indispensable to have partners. And all the new projects in the energy transition are always built with a lot of partnerships, a lot of players. So I think this is a very big change in the mindset in terms of business model that will create not necessarily new champions, but will create a lot of new opportunities for industries. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So now we have about 28 minutes left for discussion. Maybe I will ask Professor Iono to engage debate.
Thank you, Mr. Lee and other participants. Thank you for your very good presentation and also implicating comment on the presentation. I am teaching development issues and international trade here at Yonsei University. So in this panel, including yourself, the students are participating in this panel. So I think as a professor teaching and duty job to teach my students, I rather would like to raise some questions and comments from their positions rather than expert position. Actually, this issue, decarbonization issue, is very new to at least Asian students and the Asian communities, including South Korea. Of course, in Europe is very advanced country in the issue of decarbonization industry. However, Korea, Japan, China, although we are very industrialized countries, however, we have a very less understanding relatively on this issue. So I think I need to explain what is happening in this panel to my student. I think the major concept, the key issue of this panel is so-called CBAM, which is Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is supposed to be enforced from 2026, very soon. Particularly, this mechanism is going to be enforced by EU. So South Korea, Japan, China, having very big amount of trade vis-a-vis the EU. So what is the idea of the CBAM is that in case, because Europe, as I mentioned, Europe is very good at producing decarbonized items. However, many of the items produced Korea, Japan, China, and other countries are not properly decarbonized. But in order to produce decarbonized items, you must spend more money to produce that product. So, however, if you produce which is not decarbonized items, it is going to be relatively cheaper. So therefore, in case South Korea and Asian countries export their items to EU, then EU might be imposing penalties to fill the gap. That is virtually tax, trade tax. That's the key reasoning of the problem. So I understand EU's position. So we have our position. But I want to ask that from the perspective of Korea and China, that how much that mechanism, CBAM, is sophisticatedly developed, and also which is ready to be enforced in the EU. Even in the case, I have referred to some material that in the case of the steel industry in South Korea, by 2032, the steel industry, when they export their items to the EU, they may have to pay about $550 million tax in order to export their steel items from Korea to EU. And also, if we include other items, by 2030, in order for Korea to export their items to EU, we have to pay as much as $82 billion as a tax. That is going to be a huge penalty for South Korea to export their items to the EU. Maybe similar cases will apply to other countries such as China and Japan. So I want to ask whether and also EU has a 27 member countries. I really wonder whether you have a synchronized, integrated system to enforce CBAM within the EU. How much are you ready? We are now having a talk with our French counterpart rather than EU counterpart as a whole. So I want to hear about that, whether every member of the EU countries are supporting that idea. That is my first question. And secondly, I have been often asked by my student when in the class of international development cooperation, some people even argue the carbon tax issue, concerning the carbon tax issues, might be a so-called carbon imperialism. You know, the decarbonization issue and environment technology involves high level of technology. Therefore, I think developing countries, newly industrialized countries, will have a big problem in exporting their items to EU or United States, which is supposed to enforce very high level of the decarbonization standard. So then in that case, maybe as a professor or student studying international development cooperation, this might be another round of disaster. Of course, South Korea is a bit ready, but other developing countries are not very much ready, and also they do not even understand the mechanism of it, and also they do not properly know how to cope with this kind of situation. Thirdly, because we are talking with a French counterpart, I want to ask about the atomic energy issue. If my knowledge is correct, France's industry is also depending upon atomic energy resources in generating electricity. If my knowledge is correct about French industry as a whole, the energy is about the atomic based electricity power generation accounts for about 49 or 46% of the total energy as a whole. So that means France is heavily depending upon atomic energy. Meanwhile, Germany, that was about 6%. South Korea, in the case of South Korea, we are depending upon atomic energy in power generation about 27%. So what is the recent agreement on the atomic energy when it comes to related to decarbonization issue in Europe and also particularly in France? How do you deal with the concerning all E100 or taxonomy issues. Now, how do you deal with the atomic energy-related issues in discussing decarbonization issue, EU or France particularly? I will stop asking the question. Thank you.
Okay, maybe we can get a first reaction from Joseph.
Yes, I think that this discussion was directed to me very, very quickly on CBAM. CBAM is implemented by the European Union and will be dealt using the European Union umbrella. So it's a EU 27 level of implementation. So in terms of checking and checks, this will be done by the EU Commission and by the services of the EU Commission. I would just to be extremely fast on this. The carbon pricing measures is actually central and critical in speaking with CBAM. A country like Korea already has an emission trading scheme, so a carbon market, which means that for countries such as Korea, it is actually extremely easy to deal with CBAM because the only thing that Korea has to do is basically to adapt its carbon markets to the new reality and to take into consideration that price differences will be a key in order to compute the CBAM. So the carbon border adjustment mechanism. It means that for certain sectors, for instance, steel, where Korea is exporting a lot to the EU, well, basically Korea will have to raise its price level in order to match the EU CBAM. The EU price level for steel in order to be allowed to export steel to the EU. That's basically it, and it's very simple. And I think the Korean government is already implementing these measures into its own domestic policy in order to have no CBAM actually for the sectors that are critical for the Korean economies and which are connected to trade the Korean economy as with the EU. For the question related to developing countries, I think it's an important question, especially because decarbonization should not be a way to avoid developing countries to develop and to have their own industry. And we are connected. All of this is connected to climate finance, but also, if you speak about CBAM, most of these developing and especially least developing countries are not going to be covered at the beginning. So you have to consider that we are not comparing, as we say in French, pears and apples. You do not you do not deal with Ghana the same way you deal with South Korea, because South Korea is a very, very important industrial country where we can have like this kind of discussion about many ways to decarbonize industries, whereas a country still very much in development should have some leeways in order to develop and some help through climate finance. I would like to recenter the discussion maybe for other discussants, and I would have maybe one question for all of you, and this question would be: what kind of international rule or standards do you deem important to decarbonize your sector, your specific sector? So what kind of rule do you think the countries together should implement, and which one would be very central for your sector in order to decarbonize it?
Okay, who wants to answer? Maybe Mr. Kim, Yonsei Kim, do you have ideas about this?
Yeah. I think Professor Lee raised very important question and also very challenging and difficult. But from my experience, for example, focusing on the mobility sector, we have three big the actors in the world. So for example, the US. When we talk about autonomous vehicle and digital and even energy, the questions. We have US on one hand and also EU on the other hand, and we also consider the role of the China these days. And basically EU is a regulator, European Union composing of 27 countries, definitely. But we have also different the sectors. I would say sectionalism in European Union. For example, they have DG Move dealing with mobility questions, and DG Klima also environment questions, and also DG Research, and perhaps supporting all the research activities. But the ITF, for example, is a forum who can make an input for that regulators, because as Darwin said in the past, that those who are not the strongest survive, but those who adapt can survive in the end. But how can we adapt? And we have to know the context and read the future orientations. Then now reading is not enough. We have to make it happen. And that's why a lot of stakeholders should participate more actively in the forum and discussion on the different platforms. Because also European Commission is impacted by global organizations like IMO and ICAO. But the difference is that what is more homogeneous and heterogeneous? That is the question. So in the European situation, for example, perhaps they have very similar characteristics relatively, but in the international platform like IMO and United Nations agencies, you have more diversified profiles coming from African countries and also Latin American continent and so on. So I think we have to well read all the evolutive, the tendency and context, and basically from private sector and also from government sector. And in the international scene, we have to make a very productive inputs, but at the same time also in each country, there should be a smooth governance system. Unless they have a smooth governance system, basically international discussion cannot make any impact in each country. That's what we observed clearly these days.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Kim. I have another question for all the panelists, which is based on the new framework of global warming limitations, decarbonization. All these frameworks require to adapt to new regulations, constraints, and I would like to know if you consider this new set of requirement is compatible with your business, which is basically as a corporation to trigger profits, to earn money. Do you expect to earn less money in the future? What kind of transformation does it require from your respective situations? And especially in terms of technology, what kind of new challenges and new requirements are triggered through this new set of framework? Mr. Berthaud-Thiers, can you maybe start to answer?
Yes, thank you very much, Philippe. Well, definitely the speed at which things are supposed to change, the ambitions of the targets set more and more either by regional countries or by international organization is creating a momentum for technology companies to provide solutions. And we have to do it. We have to do it very quickly. It's a necessity for meeting the challenge, for helping our partners, the world, to adapt to this new environment. So it's a necessity to survive, and it's also, if you do it properly, it's also a business opportunity. But I would like to say first that before being a business opportunity, and we are going to see who has the right ideas and who is going to be able to implement them. Right now, it's a major disruption, and disruption for providers of solutions? Do they have something ready? Do they have the teams who are able to imagine the future? Are they set for that? Are they ready for such a change? And it's a disruption for their partners who are waiting for something from these vendors, from these technology companies, and we are needing that badly due to these ambitious targets. So probably for some it's going to be an opportunity, but right now for everybody it's a disruption, and it's a necessity to invest a lot and to change very quickly to get adapted to this new deal.
Thank you, Philippe. Jay, I would like to ask you, do you believe that decarbonization means and triggers a new way of making finance, of financing companies and act as a financial institution?
Yeah. In financial institution, we are highly focused on the support the energy transition cooperation, especially battery industry. Battery industry in South Korea have begun very, very quickly adapted to new regulation imposed by the Europe and United States, IRA, conduct or European CBAM, decarbonization, border adjustment mechanism also. And also Northern Europe countries such as Sweden and Finland also highly adapted to the new battery industry as well. So I believe this kind of regulation and decarbonization trend impacted a lot to, especially to the highly manufactured countries like Japan, China, South Korea, and Germany, Czech Republic. Likewise, also the other side of these regulations, good opportunistic side is that the combustion engine and combustion car should be demolished in 10 years. In a sense of 2030s, we cannot produce any more diesel or gasoline car in advanced country, right? So we are highly focused on this kind of highly intense manufactured corporation and manufactured industry, such as car industry, such as battery industry. We are highly focused on this kind of industry to shift quickly than have imposed by EU or US. But in a sense of small and middle size of enterprise are highly, they need our help as well. So not very helpful for Samsung or Hyundai Motor Group by financial institution or government support at all. Especially small and medium-sized corporation in these countries struggling at gathering resources, good talent, and also resources of capital. So our bank and Korean bank institutions are supporting this small and medium-sized enterprise to shift this diverse regulation imposed by US and EU. And also I would like to share our this kind of experience to share with French and EU think tank and cooperation as well.
President Lee, why don't we accept some questions from
that's why. We have a few minutes left, so are there any questions from the floor? Please raise your hand if you have. Any question? Yes, please.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm a student at Yonsei University, a prospective junior from international studies, and I wondered whether the cooperation between Asian countries, Korea, China, Japan, and the ASEAN nations, would this cooperation produce another innovative effect of helping the decarbonization of the Asian region? In my opinion, I thought that freeing the tariffs and the barriers of the trade and lowering the cost of the manufacturing could not indirectly lead to help lessening the burdens of these productions of making decarbonized products. But I wondered whether there would be more additional effects of the cooperation between these countries that are not used to or newly adapting this decarbonization process. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we can ask Michael Nauri, since he's covering Asian region, to answer.
Yes, with pleasure. In the same time, I will also link a bit my answer with Joseph's question. I think the first thing when we look at all those countries is today each countries are fighting with their own strategy, but each of those countries are looking at each other in implementing their strategy. They are redeveloping, and this is a bit sad, their own standards for each technology. So when we look at hydrogen, it's very much a big waste of time to redevelop all those standards, all those certification methodology, instead of trying to align them directly. And this could be a very much strong, powerful movement if for a region like Asia or APAC, you would have similar standards, because this was mentioned by Philippe. We have massive disruption. We are asking a lot to companies to decarbonize themselves. We put barriers, we put a lot of constraints, but in the same time, we don't give them the tools, because the tools are not ready in many industries. You mentioned steel. To have decarbonized steel, it's extremely complex. And we are working on hydrogen for steel, and we know exactly that such type of combustion brings a lot of issues. So you have pilot project, but you are not ready to decarbonize. And so all of this brings a lot of challenges. And so at APAC level, yes, it will be good to have more collaboration. Today, I would say the only real interesting thing is that all those countries are very much looking at what's happening in each other field. And this brings a lot of this competition that we have at least between Korea, Japan, and China brings a lot in terms of new ideas and direction. And we see sometimes, for example, for the co-combustion in power, etc., we see really those countries going in very similar ways, just by the fact that they are looking at each other.
Thank you, Michael. We have less than 2 minutes left. So, Professor, would you like to make a general comment based not only on this session, because it is the last session of GEEF Forum, but on the overall events and session which took place during 2 days?
Yes, thank you, President Lee. Personally, I have learned a lot on the decarbonization issue through this panel, and also in the GEEF 2023 as a whole. We have discussed a lot of issues on the climate change and decarbonization, which is related to environment issues and sustainable development. This year we have narrowly escaped from the COVID-19 pandemic. For the first time, we have met in person to discuss this issue. So I'm so glad that we are back in business to discuss this important issue. But at the same time, during the last 3 period, we have experienced the war taking place in another corner of the Europe, and that caused the energy price issue as well. So as a whole, on the one hand, I think we need to discuss that issue on the decarbonization issue, but at the same time, some of the voices to advocate the fossil fuel is also getting louder and louder. So, which is we are at the very controversial juncture to discuss this matter. And also another point is that as we discussed today, there are certainly the gap in terms of perspective between Europe and developed countries and Asia and also developing countries. So therefore, but however, I think one of the conclusions we are reaching at is we need to take an initiative to promote sustainability in the industry and the environment as a whole. Therefore, I think conclusion is quite certain that we must cooperate to invent the better ways to tackle this crisis. So therefore, I think although there are some difficult barriers sitting formed between the two continents, Asia and Europe, but through this initiative, I think President Lee, you must play an important part to tackle this issue. So therefore, this is just the beginning, another round of beginning. So to prevent another big the disaster, we must make an important effort jointly. So in that sense, I think this has been a very important moment to discuss important issue on industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lee, for your valuable comments and for hosting this session and GEEF Forum. I'm sure we will be able to, with all the participants today, to extend discussion and cooperation based on Joseph's suggestion made earlier, and maybe we can start with Korea, Europe, and that will be one of the tasks of the think tank and of all the participants. I'd like to ask now a big round of applause to all the participants who came today and speakers, and we will be pleased to see you again. And now I give the floor to our distinguished MC.
Thank you very much for a very insightful session. I think this session awakened us, gave us awareness building for the decarbonization. And it was a great time to remind us that cooperation between countries, between industries are necessary to make a progress in terms of decarbonization and to the end for sustainability. Over the last 2 days, we have gone through a number of topics and perspectives on how we as citizens, organizations, and countries can contribute to achieving the UN SDGs. We hope that this forum was inspiring and helpful for everyone who joined us. And we'll be holding the final closing ceremony in 10 minutes at this Centennial Hall. So I kindly ask all of you who are here to make a short walk to the Centennial Hall together. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you.